Sometimes we hear about the big names in the Bible. We talk about Peter, Paul, Mary, David. Their stories are famous. But there are also these other people who did amazing things but didn't get as much spotlight. One of those people was a man named Epaphroditus. He almost died for the gospel. And his story tells us a lot about what it really means to follow Jesus. Think about Paul, the apostle. He wrote so many letters. He traveled all over the place. He started churches. He went through a lot of tough stuff: beatings, shipwrecks, hunger, imprisonment. He was in prison more than once. And when he was in prison, he needed help. He couldn't just walk out and get food or supplies. He depended on other people. One of the places Paul had a really close relationship with was the church in Philippi. That church was special to him. He started it on his second missionary journey. You can read about it in the book of Acts. Paul and Silas were there. They met a woman named Lydia, who became the first convert. Then they cast a demon out of a slave girl, and that got them into trouble, as they were beaten and thrown into jail. But even in jail, they praised God. And then an earthquake happened, and the jailer and his family got saved. It was a dramatic beginning for that church. So the Philippian church had seen firsthand what it meant to suffer. They saw Paul suffer, and they were a generous church. They loved Paul deeply. They supported him financially even when he was in other places. This was unusual for Paul. He usually didn't take money from churches so he wouldn't be a burden, but the Philippians, he let them help. They sent him money more than once, and he appreciated it. They were truly partners with him in the gospel. Now, Paul is in prison again. We think this was probably in Rome. He's not just locked up, he's on trial. His life is on the line, and the Philippians hear about this. They worry about him. They want to help him. They can't all go to Rome, of course. So they do what makes sense. They send their best man. They send Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus wasn't just a messenger for the Philippians. He wasn't just bringing money. He was much more than that. Paul describes him in Philippians chapter 2, verse 25. He calls him my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier. That's high praise from Paul. He also calls him your messenger and minister to my needs. So Epaphroditus was a representative of the Philippian church. He was their hands and feet, serving Paul on their behalf. Imagine that trip. Traveling in the ancient world was hard. It wasn't like hopping on a plane today. You had to walk or ride a donkey or maybe take a ship. There were robbers on the roads. Storms at sea. It was dangerous. It was tiring, and it took a long time. Epaphroditus probably carried a good amount of money too, which made him a target. He knew the risks, but he went anyway. He was serving the Lord by serving Paul. When he arrived in Rome, his job wasn't just to hand over the money and leave. No, he was there to minister to Paul's needs. Think about what that meant. When Paul was in prison, he might have been chained to a guard. He might not have had good food. He might have needed someone to run errands for him, to get supplies, to deliver messages. Epaphroditus stepped into that role. He became Paul's personal helper, his support system, his connection to the outside world. This wasn't a glamorous job. It was probably draining. It was probably dirty. And it was definitely dangerous. Being associated with a prisoner, especially one like Paul, who was seen as a troublemaker, could put you in a bad spot too. Epaphroditus didn't shy away from it. He plunged himself into this service. He gave his all. He wasn't just delivering a message, he was dedicating himself fully to Paul's care. This wasn't a casual visit. He committed to staying with Paul for a while to really make a difference in his difficult situation. And then something terrible happened. Epaphroditus became very sick. Paul tells us this in his letter. He says Epaphroditus was sick, almost unto death. This wasn't just a cold or a headache. This was serious. He was so ill that he nearly died. He was on the brink of death. We don't know what kind of sickness it was. The Bible doesn't say. Maybe he caught something on the journey. Maybe the conditions in Rome or in the prison environment where he was serving Paul were very unsanitary. And maybe the stress and the exhaustion of his service wore him down. He had traveled a long distance. He was probably working hard, tirelessly, to care for Paul. He was putting his own comfort and safety aside for Paul's sake. He was pushing his body to the limits. Paul explicitly connects Epaphroditus' illness to his service. He says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 30, that Epaphroditus, for the work of Christ, came close to death, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. That's a powerful statement. He didn't just get sick by chance. He got sick because of the work he was doing for Christ. He risked his very life. What does risking his life mean here? It means he wasn't just passively catching a bug. It suggests a deliberate choice to push himself, to go above and beyond, even when it meant putting his own health on the line. He knew the stakes, he knew the trip was hard, he knew prison conditions were bad. He knew the work would be taxing, but he did it anyway. His dedication was so complete that he worked himself to the point of collapse, to the point of almost dying. This was a man utterly devoted to his mission. His sickness wasn't just a physical problem. It was a deep emotional issue for everyone involved. Paul was in prison, facing his own potential death sentence. Now, his loyal friend and helper, the man who brought him comfort and support, was also dying. As Paul writes, "Indeed, he was sick, almost unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow." Think about Paul's heart here. He was already suffering. If Epaphroditus had died, it would have been another crushing blow. It would have added to his already heavy burden of grief and worry. God's mercy wasn't just for Epaphroditus, but for Paul too. It saved Paul from even more sorrow, and Epaphroditus, even in his own sickness, was thinking about others. Paul says, "For he was longing for you all and was distressed, because you had heard that he was sick." This is remarkable. He's on his deathbed, almost gone, and his main concern isn't for himself. It's for the Philippians. He knew they loved him. He knew they had sent him. He knew they would be worried sick if they heard he was ill. So he was distressed that they had heard. That shows an incredible level of selflessness and love for his church family. He didn't want to cause them pain, even as he was enduring his own. But God, in his goodness, intervened. Epaphroditus recovered. It was a miracle, really. He had been so close to death. God had mercy on him, and Paul was immensely relieved. He could send Epaphroditus back to the Philippians with good news, not bad news. Paul decided to send Epaphroditus back to Philippi. This wasn't just because he had recovered. It was also because Paul knew how worried the Philippians were. Paul says, "The more I send him, the more eagerly, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety." Paul wanted to ease their minds. He knew seeing Epaphroditus alive and well would bring them great joy and relieve their anxiety. And Epaphroditus carried Paul's letter back with him. The very letter we call Philippians today. Imagine that. He had nearly died, and now he was carrying this precious letter from Paul, a letter full of love, encouragement, and instruction, back to his home church. He was still serving even on his way home. Paul tells the Philippians how they should receive him. He doesn't just say, "He's coming home." He says, "Receive him in the Lord with all joy, and hold such men in honor, because for the work of Christ he came close to death, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me." And this is a strong command to honor Epaphroditus. Paul wanted the Philippians to understand the depth of their brother's sacrifice. He wasn't just someone who got sick, he was a hero. So how did he almost die for the gospel? Epaphroditus wasn't standing on a street corner preaching. He wasn't writing theological treatises. His work for the gospel was practical. It was serving Paul. But why was serving Paul the work of Christ? Well, Paul was a direct agent of the gospel. He was an apostle called by God to spread the message of Jesus to the Gentiles. When Paul was in prison, his ability to do that work was severely limited. He couldn't travel. He couldn't preach freely. But he could still write letters. He could still interact with people who visited him. And Epaphroditus' service made all of that possible. Epaphroditus brought the financial support that allowed Paul to live in prison, to have paper and pens, to maybe even rent a private dwelling while under house arrest, which sometimes happened. He was the one running errands, getting supplies, making sure Paul's basic needs were met. This allowed Paul to focus on writing his letters, on praying, on ministering to those who came to him. Without Epaphroditus, Paul's suffering would have been far greater, and his ability to continue his ministry, even from prison, would have been severely hampered. So Epaphroditus' work was literally enabling the spread of the gospel. He was not the orator, but he was the indispensable support behind the orator. He was the one who made sure the missionary could continue his mission. That's why his service was the work of Christ. It directly facilitated the advancement of God's kingdom, and his sacrifice shows the real cost of following Jesus. It's not always comfortable. It's not always easy. Sometimes it means putting your own life at risk. Sometimes it means working yourself to the bone. Epaphroditus didn't seek glory. He wasn't trying to become famous. He was simply being faithful. He saw a need, and he filled it with all his heart and strength. His story reminds us that there are many ways to serve the gospel. Not everyone is called to be a public speaker or a missionary who travels to distant lands. Some are called to support those who do. Some are called to practical, behind-the-scenes service. And that service is just as valuable, just as vital, and sometimes just as dangerous. Epaphroditus' story elevates the quiet, diligent servant. It shows that God sees and honors even the hidden acts of faithfulness. Think about the character of this man. He was selfless, he was courageous, he was dedicated, he was empathetic, worried about his church even when he was dying. He was humble, simply doing what needed to be done. He was a true partner in the gospel, not just in word, but in deed and in suffering. His almost death wasn't in a glorious battle or a public execution. It was from sickness, brought on by his devoted service. This makes his sacrifice relatable. Many people suffer illness, exhaustion, and stress because of their work for the Lord, in big ways or small. Well, Epaphroditus embodies that kind of everyday sacrifice. He pushed himself so hard, so completely, that his body almost gave out. This wasn't some minor inconvenience. This was a full-scale health crisis directly related to his commitment to Christ and his servant heart. And the fact that Paul so highly commended him, urging the Philippians to honor him, tells us how important this kind of service is. Paul wasn't just being polite. He genuinely valued Epaphroditus' commitment and suffering. He wanted the entire church to recognize and celebrate this man who had literally put his life on the line for the sake of the gospel. He wanted them to understand that such dedication deserves respect and appreciation. Epaphroditus' story also highlights the vital importance of community in the Christian faith. The Philippians sent him. Paul cared for him. God had mercy on him. The church family was interconnected, supporting each other through prayer, practical help, and emotional care. When one member suffered, everyone felt it. When one recovered, everyone rejoiced. This is how the church is supposed to work. His journey, his service, his illness, his recovery, and his return all paint a picture of deep Christian commitment. It wasn't about fame or power for Epaphroditus. It was about faithfully serving Christ by serving one of his most important apostles. He probably didn't even realize he would be mentioned in a letter that would be read for thousands of years. He was just doing his part, giving his all. So Epaphroditus, the man who almost died, he reminds us that the gospel costs something. It costs Jesus his life, and it can cost us ours in different ways. It might not be a dramatic martyrdom. It might be the slow burn of exhaustion from tireless service. It might be the hidden pain of sacrifice that no one else sees, but God sees it, and he honors it. His story should inspire us to think about our own service. Are we giving our all? Are we willing to risk something for the sake of the gospel? Are we faithfully serving even in the mundane or difficult tasks? Are we supporting those who are on the front lines, even if it means we are behind the scenes? Epaphroditus answered these questions with his life. He showed us what it means to truly put Christ first, to dedicate oneself completely, even to the point of death, for the advancement of his kingdom. He is a quiet hero of the faith, a testament to selfless love and unwavering devotion. And his story, though short, speaks volumes about the heart of true discipleship.